smoking a pack a day and lost 10 pounds.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Operation Iraqi Freedom had begun. I was smoking a pack a day and lost 10 pounds. When I watched the news, I knew my husband was in one of those tan military tanks cruising along the desert sands heading toward Baghdad. He was an infantry soldier, which meant he was a part of the front line of the attack. I was living in Fort Benning, Georgia, home of the infantry, with my 7- and 4-year-old sons. With 70% of the soldiers deployed, Fort Benning felt like a ghost town. The remaining soldiers worked for the training units preparing future rangers, snipers, airborne, and infantry soldiers. The wives who stayed, rather than go home to their extended families, stayed because of work, because they were unwilling to pull their children out of school, or because they were simply holding on to the hope that maybe the guys would be home sooner than later. Everywhere, wives clung to one another, spending the days connected on the phone, huddled in groups in school hallways, or strewn across front lawns, passing around hopeful rumors, providing a support group for each other. On other days, those same wives spent their time spreading gossip. Oh, did you hear about the wife who hasn't sent her husband a single letter since he's been deployed? And did you hear about the wife who was cheating on her husband with another soldier, and now she's pregnant? And did you hear about the wife who was placed in a mental institute after overdosing on pills, and they took her kids away? How thoughtless and irresponsible. They say she was depressed. There were family readiness group meetings where everyone eagerly anticipated any morsel of information. Something more than the media would provide, because, after all, we were the wives. The reality, though, was that the unit kept information from us for as long as possible. All we got was, we know as much as you do. The last time we spoke was February 20th, the day of our 7-year anniversary. He told me that it would probably be his last phone call for a while. They were moving out of the camp to make room for another unit. Don't worry, everything will be fine. The confidence in his voice put me at ease. Months later, I would learn that his unit had pushed forward to the Iraqi border. He had known, but was prohibited from telling me. On March 17th, I clipped an article from the Stars and Stripes military newspaper. The headline read, "You will all go home heroes." Under it was a picture of my husband's unit, the 3rd Infantry Brigade. Soldiers lined up neatly, standing in formation. Just a mass of blurred uniforms. There was no way to distinguish my husband from the hundreds, but it didn't stop me from desperately scanning the photo. Maybe that was him. The day he left had been stressful, no matter how hard we tried to make it a smooth and happy one. We kept the boys home from school and spent the morning packing Christmas decorations. Then, we took the boys to Hollywood Connection for an afternoon of video games and putt-putt golf. Later, we stopped for ice cream and then went home to watch him pack the rest of his bags. In the evening, we lay in bed. Our intention was to make love, but instead, we just held each other. I cried, confessed I was scared. He tried to reassure me. He told me I was strong and I would be fine. To just think of it like another training exercise. Nothing would happen. I let him believe that I believed him. I let him believe that I would be fine. The guys had to report to the company by 10 p.m. We rode there mostly in silence. Dressed in his desert combat uniform, he held my hand, gently stroking his thumb over mine. He asked me not to stay with him when we arrived. He preferred that we say our goodbyes and I go back home. It would just make it harder on him, and he didn't want to lose it in front of the boys. I promised him I wouldn't stay long. We pulled up where soldiers were huddled in smoking groups. Some sat on their duffel bags alone. Couples stood by their vehicles, chit-chatting, holding hands, holding each other, making out. My husband got out of the car, took out his bags, and put them with the others. We smoked a cigarette together and went over a few last-minute things, bills and stuff of that sort. Then he held my face in his hands and told me again that everything would be all right, that I was strong and I would be fine. I smiled. He gave me a kiss, held me for a minute, then opened the driver's side door and ushered me in. He opened the back door and reaching into the back seat, he gave each of the boys a hug and a kiss and told them, "I love you." He closed the door and waved one last time before walking away. I put the keys in the ignition, strapped on my seatbelt, and backed the car out. I watched his back as I drove away from him. "Aren't you sad, Mommy?" my 7-year-old asked. "Of course I am. Why?" "I don't know. I thought you would be crying," he answered. I told him I was sad, but I didn't want to cry because Daddy told me to be strong. But as the boys dozed off with the radio turned up and the car pitch black, silently, I wept all the way home. The first 2 weeks after Operation Iraqi Freedom began, family and friends called daily, asking if I knew anything or if I had heard from him, which, of course, I could never understand. It was a war, and by the way, he was in it. They asked how the boys were, and finally, how was I? This was nice in the beginning, an overwhelming amount of love, support, and concern with prayers for all of us. It was reassuring and comforting at first, but it soon became a constant reminder when I was trying not to remember. I told them I was fine. I didn't know how else to be. I said, "I know as much as you do."